Welcome to Ending the Stigma, a path to recovery. A mental health and addiction recovery podcast show. Gordon.
All right.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Ending the Stigma, a path to recovery with the great, not the late great, the current great, Scott H. Silverman, and me, Fred Carroll. How are you, Scott?
Well, I'm better now, Fred. Fred and I were just talking, and he's solved a 9-month-old problem for me today. At least we have an idea anyway. And it's Monday, and it's usually coming off the weekend and talking to families all weekend. But just something feels different, and I'm kind of excited about launching something cool. And the issues continue. No one's fixing it, and people aren't talking about it. So you and I are going to do something to add value to those who are suffering out there and continue to reduce the stigma. So I'm kind of pumped up. I only have a couple minor rants, but none of them are really important. And I'm having hamburgers for dinner. So my wife doesn't know that yet. So I'm pretty excited. How about you? How's your week been?
Well, my week's been okay, and I've been very productive because I'm looking to build my business structure and stuff. So I've been doing a lot of that. Doing a ton of LinkedIn learning videos and stuff. A lot of them. But you had brought up, let's start today with this Hope Solo stuff, because you had brought up about the soccer thing. So I'm just becoming aware of this to a point. This happened Saturday, April 30th is the article and stuff. So, but it's relevant to what me and you discuss a lot and something you're familiar with, which is alcoholism. So basically, she's a Hope Solo, for people that don't know, is the former goalkeeper for the U.S. women's national soccer team. And it appears she's going to enter an alcohol rehab program after she was found passed out behind the wheel of her car with her children in the back seat.
Oh, I didn't even read those details. That's, yeah. Was she moving? Was she driving, or she just kind of parked and passed out?
According to this, she just, it really doesn't, it says she had allegedly been passed out for more than an hour in a Walmart parking lot with the engine of her car running while her 2-year-old twins were in the back seat when she was noticed by a passerby. And it said they could smell alcohol on her breath. When they attempted to administer a field sobriety test, she refused, and a blood sample was taken instead. So she was arrested and all these things. And she's had run-ins with law enforcement over the last 10 years. She was accused of assaulting her own sister and her nephew in an incident in Seattle. A domestic violence charge that was later dismissed. But this is where I wonder. So from your experience, is this PR just making it go away? Is she serious, if you had to guess? Is she serious about going to rehab, or is this just PR?
There's a saying, a nudge from the judge. And most people know what that is. But there's also something what I call shut-up treatment, where people go into treatment to shut everybody up. I don't know. I don't know her. I don't know her circumstances. I don't know her story. But if everything you've just shared, has happened to her in the last 10 years, my sense would be that if she was facing the loss of parental control with her children, or advised by an attorney, you better get into rehab, or that could happen. Because at that age, in California, if that took place, I don't even think they would. Child Protective Services would probably go in immediately, take her children, then she'd have to spend the next 12 months with a group of attorneys getting her kids back. So I don't know her circumstances, but it's a coin toss at this point. She might be serious. I hope she's serious. But most people usually, when they go in after something like that, their duality of motivation is certainly something that needs to be, held in abeyance, so to speak.
Now, what if this is just an everyday Joe? Is this even?
I think, because an everyday Joe probably wouldn't be able to, go hire an attorney. I mean, if she got a DUI, DUIs in California, or minimum at that level, 15,000 with 2 children, you're probably going to have to get a bigger, higher profile firm, which means you may have to lay out 25 to 50 grand to make sure that your defense, not knowing what her prior arrests were. But if this is a second or third, then it's really a problem. You lose your license. You can't drive, cars impounded, and with children in the back seat, because technically if you're under the influence sitting in a car, that's they call that a moving violation, even though you might have been parked, and it's still a DUI. Yeah. So I don't know those circumstances. It could be, she could be in a very precarious state, plusly with young children too in the back, because once the media gets a hold of it, the prosecution has to set an example. And because she's got history, no matter what her level in society is, there's could be some real trouble for her. And long term.
She's also she is in a marriage with Jeremy Stevens, who's an ex-NFL player, who also, in another incident, he was suspended because he was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving. So these kids are in danger with 2 parents that have alcohol issues. He was driving a U.S. soccer team van and got arrested drinking and driving. So these people are really pushing the envelope, but I wish him well.
And if they have issues amongst themselves, he could point to her and put some pressure on the situation, unless they're working together to try to get help. But if they both have that experience, one of the evaluations I would assume that CPS is going to do is if the children are in a safe environment. I don't know how they're going to avoid that. There's going to be some investigation, one would think, especially with both parents going at it. I don't know if they have other children or not, but at the end of the day, in today's society, that kind of behavior, people generally don't turn their back and just don't turn a blind eye. They move into it, and they move in pretty aggressively. And, depending, maybe grandparents or aunts or uncles will take the children, because if she's gone for rehab and he's the sole, parent, and he's got history, the CPS, I would assume, will do an investigation, and then figure out what they need to do next. And no matter what they promise, the circumstances are what they are. So the court gets involved. Protective Services gets involved. They don't just go, thanks for updating us. They open an investigation, and it goes on for quite some time.
Yeah, it is.
Monitoring, probation, things of that nature.
Well, we wish her luck. And maybe one day we could have her as a guest and see if we could hear her end of the story, because those are the people we're seeking, are people that recognize their issue and move forward to prevent it from happening again or happening to others. So let's move into I was doing a deep dive into the suicide facts and stuff again, just to see how things are going. So this is some of the things that stuck out to me. One is 700,000 people die from suicide every year. 700,000. This is worldwide. For every suicide, I hate using the word successful. I don't know what other word, for every suicide resulting in death, I guess, there are 3 that don't. People forget about that, the attempted suicide. A prior suicide attempt is single most important risk factor for suicide in the general population. It is the 4th leading cause of death among 15 to 19-year-olds. And 77% of global suicides occur in low and middle income countries. I was reading, I was alarmed at the rate in Africa, in the different countries of Africa, how I'm talking they go into the 50% for men. That's how it's just alarming. And these aren't just your typical, I'm assuming that's just life struggle issues more than the American version of life struggle.
How recent is the study, and how far back does it go? Because it'd be interesting to know up until, let's say, 2015, what was that percentage compared to 2015 to, say, 2022? Meaning, is the increase commensurate with the percentage of individuals taking their own life? And I'm not testing you. I'm just saying,
I know.
To show a trend. What's the trend look like? Because clearly, if the last 5 years, and I'm wondering, because obviously this current pandemic the data from 2021, we probably won't even see until the end of 2022, if not, not later than 2023. So, because suicides are very difficult to, the documentation comes and they're slow to come around. And a lot of times families won't self-disclose that. So unless it's public record, that data might even be way conservative if you think about it globally.
Yeah, well, it probably is conservative. I assume it is, but I do have some of the answers that you're seeking. One of them is, I do know that the study between pre-2000 and the study 20 years later to 2020, it is at 30% higher. The suicide rate is 30% higher since the internet generation has joined, but this is from 2021, late in 2021, December of 2021. So that's why I went off this. I do look at the dates because things have just changed. Everything's changed. Depression and alcohol use is one of the top disorders. It's well established in high-income countries. They claim many suicides happen impulsively in moments of crisis with a breakdown in the ability to deal with life stresses. Financial problems in the wealthier end of it play a big role. And then relationship breakups, chronic pain, and illness are another. So it's hard to read some of these facts, but I think somebody has to, and we have to, as people, to report it at least. But it's estimated that 20% of global suicides are due to pesticide self-poisoning, most of which occur in rural agricultural. So this is in the farming communities and stuff. And that just sounds like a horrible way to end your life, poisoning. But an easy tool to get a hold of. And wasn't there recently, a very high profile individual, I think the news, Naomi Judd, they talked about she died from mental health illness, which is something I have not quite heard many times, which was an interesting way of framing what happened to her. So I don't know if that's a hidden meaning until more is revealed, or what they actually even meant by that. Well, you mean with Judd? With the country? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going to pretend I don't understand what they're trying to say. I think they're clearly telling you, and just using words that maybe we should start be using, because until we start saying she died of a mental health issue, maybe that is the key to making people, for lack of a better term, give a shit. Maybe people will give a shit if we start saying she died of mental health rather than she died of suicide. Because the minute you say somebody died of suicide or drug overdose, they get labeled as a nothing. They're not as human as you and I. They're just scum, or whatever the word they use. It just mentally, that's where we go to. We go to the worst. Well, she probably deserved it. Well, this is her own. She had plenty of opportunities. They make her less human. But maybe by saying she died of mental health, now people see this is a wealthy woman, a talented woman, a famous woman who suffered her whole life with this stuff. If you read deeper into it, she talked about it in her books about dealing with medical issues around mental health. So to die of mental health, to me, clearly says she took her own life. And that's just my opinion. That's what I read when I see that. And I think maybe it's the right way to write it. I think it's respectful, at the same time impactful at both times. What do you think?
Well, and there's I don't know where I read it, but it was a couple of years ago, that there's a high percentage of substance use disorders with people who take their own life, just because if you're self-medicating to try to deal with the mental health part of it, or depression or anxiety, and I'm sure you're a good researcher, you'll find it, that takes place as well. And hence the term co-occurring. And one of the things that we're trying to do at Confidential Recovery here in our community is we're trying to assess that as a duality rather than, because the problem with benefits-driven help is if you don't get this diagnosis, the insurance company won't pay for it. So we're trying to get some real truth. We want to know, but we do know that most people that are anesthetizing themselves, once you remove the anesthesia, you can start to work on the mental health issues. And I've never met somebody who suffers from substance use disorder or alcoholism or gambling addiction or sex addiction or internet addiction or food addiction, that once you help them address that part of it, you do a deeper dive and then you get into the trauma and helping treat the untreated trauma, because they kind of just, they're at both ends of the candle on that one. You generally can't have one and not the other. There are people who have mental health illness that do not use mood altering substances, but there are a lot of people with mental health issues who are on lots of medication, and it's needed. And if it's managed, then it's different than if it's not managed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. And the stigma and the taboo of it even goes into that, where, for the stigma, surrounding mental disorder and suicide, at least, it means people thinking of taking their own life or who have attempted it already are not seeking help at all and not getting the help they need. So the prevention of the suicide has not been addressed due to the lack of awareness of it. I'm reading this here that says, so countries are even having a trouble with this because certain religions have taboos on suicide and stuff like that, which shouldn't even matter anymore into the 2020s. It's here. We have to face it. If we don't face it, it's just going to get worse and continue. But only 38 countries out of all the countries in this world have reported having a national suicide prevention strategy. So only 38 countries. And what are there, 160 something countries, something like that? So perhaps, obviously me and you have spoken about, that's the whole purpose of us doing this show, is to maybe create some kind of a awareness, at least for at least one person. Our goal is to, of course, save the world, but we're happy saving one person today and 2 tomorrow, 4 the next day. We want to compound it. And the number one way is people sharing this show. So if they want to share the show for us, that helps us greatly. Organic sharing is the number one way to market yourself without spending a fortune. But listening to the show, just responding to the show will help. Talk about it.
Or let us know if you found something. I mean, there are, I'd say a ton. I believe there are lots of crisis hotlines. I know you've given the number out many times, but most local communities, statewide and nationally, because the mental health piece of trying to help is, in my opinion, a lot more open about trying to get people to make a phone call versus the world of substance use disorders, because they just, there's still that moral failing is still going on out there. So mental health, I think, gets funded much more effectively than the overall. When you look at the overall behavioral health side of it, there's more resources out there for educating. There aren't necessarily more beds, because the bed part is really hard, and treating mental health is pretty darn opaque, and it takes time to assess, stabilize, and then put people on an effective path. And there's more meetings for alcohol and drugs than there are for mental health, as far as I know.
Right. Yeah. It's very, like every week, we're always baffled by something every week. When we could do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we'd still not be able to land on a solution. That's how difficult of a decision this is, because it's not only state to state, or country to country, state to state, county by county, city by city. It just breaks down so far that, and then it's broken down by wealthy, poor, you got all by color, by race, by religion. Everything gets broken down between this, when realistically, it's just, we're proving it. Judd, now I always forget which judge she is. So there's Ashley, the daughter. Then there's, now I can't think of, which judge was it that passed away?
I think it was Naomi.
Naomi is the mother. But
Naomi,
I think she is providing enough proof to that even money doesn't matter to mental health. It does not care how wealthy you are.
Right.
Status, being famous, maybe it even makes mental health even harder to deal with, because she can't just show up. A famous person can't just show up at some rehab and without it, and they don't know how to do it without cameras. They don't know how to do it without PR or articles. They can't do it without telling the world they're doing it, because some TMZ will be out there telling the story, and then they tell their version of the story.
Yeah.
Very confusing.
Even confidential treatment centers, if they don't take people's phones when they go in, if somebody, decides they want to share that information, it's hard to get into a confidential environment, but what's more important, it's hard to admit that you really need help, because people around you, either are scared of you. And, it's interesting that the framing you just shared, I have learned in my experience in recovery that success sometimes can be a bigger barrier than failure to overcome. Meaning people who have success look at themselves as if, this can't be happening to me, so it's not happening to me. And when the reality hits, that's when people tend to, they'll take their own lives because of the embarrassment. And then on the other hand, people who suffer from mental health issues, there's no easy way to seek help. It takes time. And admitting you have the problem can be even more complicated. And it's embarrassing for families. I mean, I still see families when I know about somebody who's actually overdosed and the family says they died of a heart attack at 33. And those in the community that are close to the, situation, we kind of get a sense, and families don't want to talk about it because it's shame-based and nobody wants to be judged, especially if you're high profile and you have an important position, so to speak, and you sit on committees and you're part of the philanthropic community. You don't want people thinking that there's somebody in your family that has a problem.
Right. And it actually goes down, and we don't talk politics, but this isn't so much political as it is. It even goes as far as to this Hunter Biden, who clearly had an addiction issue. But I don't agree with the way, because of who his father is, and I don't have a big problem with Joe Biden in the sense of the person he is, but in his parenting role, away from his politically, I think he went about this wrong. I think he found a way to solve it from his power level rather than his parent level. I think he solved it with money, and he solved it with who he knows rather than what he knows or the resources.
I've heard him and Hunter talk about it publicly, not on a regular basis, but I think he's shared about it and how he thinks his son has worked hard to move away from it, but on the other hand, again, as a parent, you want to try to protect your children. And of course, the political world, there's just so much untruth out there right now. I don't even want, my attitude, and I've always shared this when a family asks me, how do you know if they're telling the truth? And my attitude is, if they're actively under the influence, some mood altering, their lips are moving, they don't know what the truth is. So they'll say whatever they have to say to move their own agenda. So I don't trust the person who suffers, the addict, if you will, just because they've learned how to lie, cheat, and manipulate to facilitate their ability to hide what they're doing and to keep doing what they're doing and try to get away with it. So, it's a tough one. And, I think you and I have talked about this as well. We've seen a lot of people come out now because there's no place to hide. I mean, if you're arrested for a DUI, it's public. There's no place to hide. And especially in the world with, sports figures and, the movie stars and very wealthy people. And of course, the kind of things that we're seeing with these high profile folks, they're accidentally overdosing because they're just, they don't know what to do. So they keep taking more and then they mix it. And all of a sudden they get a hold of a batch of some, something laced with fentanyl. And there's no coming out of it. I mean, they're getting poisoned and they're dying.
Yeah, it's definitely something that people just have to, I still go by the ability though. I still think it's important that rather than worrying about who's telling the truth and who's lying, we just help everybody that asks for help. And if they're not telling the truth, that's on them, not you. You still have to do the job of getting them the information. And it is about information at this point. But I'm afraid the schools have failed it. The schools are failing it. The politics is definitely failing it. I think it's time for us, just everyday people like us, to talk about it and tell the stories. And, there's so many opportunities out there now to talk about it. And I don't want people to use it. I'd rather the people that really need the help step forward. But there are people out there that will pretend they need help for attention.
And, to be honest, totally honest, Fred, when I say that, it's not to demean anybody, but what it does is it helps families understand that they have to take what they're hearing with a grain of salt, because it's a person who's suffering, who's verbalizing what's going on. And most people try to confront the person who's suffering, and that ends up like a balloon. You squeeze it and they go in different directions. So it's not to call someone a liar. It's just to educate the people around them to know that what they might be telling you more than likely isn't the truth, and it's what they think you want to hear. So if you can filter that, you can be a much more effective advocate for that person and really embrace the idea of helping them seek help, knowing what you need to do as a person who cares about them to help them make the right decision, because their decision maker is unfortunately toxic and inconsistent and is trying to maintain the level of anesthesia that they want, because they're in the throes of anesthesia. So they're not really thinking, I should do this because that's a good idea. They don't really know at this point. They've gotten to a point where their brain is not functioning the way it should.
Yeah, once again, we've reached the end where we could probably talk about this forever, but I think we talked about enough today. We don't want to bring people too down, but you want to give your phone number out there?
Absolutely. 619-993-2738. I want to hear from you. 619-993-2738. Call me or text me anytime, or just Google me, Scott H. Silverman, and let's start a conversation.
And what's your website?
YourCrisisCoach.com.
YourCrisisCoach.com. YourCrisisCoach.com. And I flash that on the screen every time during the edit of these shows. And so that's Scott H. Silverman. This is Ending the Stigma. I'm Fred Carroll. And once again, if no one has told you they love you today, we love you. And we will see you again next week. Goodbye.
Thanks, Fred. See you soon.
See you soon.
Ending the Stigma, A Path to Recovery is produced by Venom Studios. Copyright 2022 by Venom Podcast Studios. The show is hosted by life coach and author Scott H. Silverman and author Fred Carroll. Our intention is to reduce all stigmas and to provide information that isn't discussed enough. If you or someone you know has an issue, please contact your local authorities or substance abuse counseling centers for help. The suicide hotline could be reached by dialing 1-800-273-8255 or simply text the word HOME to 741-741 for free 24/7 counseling. Scott H. Silverman's information could be found by visiting his website at YourCrisisCoach.com. And to learn more about author Fred Carroll, please visit www.venomstudios.com. That's studios with a Z. And remember, if no one has told you they love you today, we love you. This has been Ending the Stigma.